The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello again, this is Ralph Boehm for a legislative update, all by myself today, so if I mess up, I don't have anybody to help. Anyway, so continue from last week on the bills that we did at last week's session, but first I'd like to put a plug in for the Litchfield Veterans. If you notice, there are 2 flagpoles up, one at Hillcrest Cemetery and one at Pinecrest Cemetery. And for example, here's a picture of at night on Pinecrest Cemetery, and light up on top. It's a cool light. And this is all done by the Litchfield Veterans, all by themselves. Ourselves, I'm part of it. Anyway, and for example, here's the next picture of us doing it. And if you see them, I'm in the second one in. We're hauling in the flagpole. No equipment was done for this. We all did it by hand, dug the hole, put the concrete in, and raised the pole. The light on top is actually a solar panel LED light, and it's round. It's particularly made for the flagpole, so hopefully it won't need changing of bulbs, or it doesn't need electricity or anything. So that's cool. So that's what the first picture I showed. This was done last Tuesday morning. It was a little chilly. At least the ground wasn't frozen like when they put the Hillcrest one in. They did it on February 17th. I wasn't there to help that time because the 17th was that session day with the governor's state of the state, and I was other places, and we know. But anyway, and they had to dig through some solid ground. The only frozen, we had about a foot under, there was some frozen, but it wasn't that bad, so we dug through it. So anyway, and so the Litchfield Veterans, just want to mention that because they meet on the second Saturday of the month at the fire station at 8 o'clock in the morning. So any veterans that want to join, please, it doesn't cost anything to join. And they do a lot of fundraisers, which they did here with the polls and stuff, and you can go Litchfield, New Hampshire Veterans at their Facebook, so you can find out what they're doing. And while we're at that, what we did last week, we did pass a bill, HB 1667, was relative to standard and optional veterans tax credits and all veterans tax credits. One of the problems, to fix the law to handle, one of the problems is it wasn't taken care of like National Guard and reserves. And like somebody testified that while he was in the regular Army, he was stationed in the States, and then he left the Army and went into the National Guard. And it was in the National Guard that he saw all the war duty, you might say, in Afghanistan and Iraq. But he wasn't then legally able to be a veteran to take the tax credit. So that's been fixed, hopefully. And well, we'll have to go to the Senate and whatnot. So just to let you know, we're doing those things. So that takes care of that. Now, next thing we have is HB 1070. That was my bill on the default budget. That passed the House. It's now going to the Senate. It was a little fight, but it passed 172 to 162. It doesn't affect that many towns, does Litchfield and a lot of towns around us, but the Municipal Association, we know who they work for. They work for the people that are abusing the default budget. Of course they were against it. So anyway, hopefully that goes to the Senate. And that's for simple, and I brought it up a month or so ago when I first put it in, and it was to anything the governing body, selectmen or school board, reduces in the proposed operating budget, they must make those same reduction in the default. Common sense. For example, we're doing away with 3 teachers. What they always done in the past is leave those 3 teachers in the default. That's not right. We know that's not right. So anyway, hopefully that'll pass and so we can the defaults won't be higher than the proposed operating budget. And it was never supposed to be that way. So anyway, okay. Now, let's go back to labor, HB 1210. That's a bill to add right of conscience as an option for vaccine mandates. In other words, you can get you cannot get the vaccine, for example, if you have a religious reasoning or health reasoning, and it was added in a right of conscience. My conscience won't let me get that vaccine. So that was added. Also, another bill in municipal and county, and this was put in by a representative from Brookline, and great bill, HB 1393. It's also municipal and county. If you want to look it up, HB 1393. Anyway, it puts a budget, allows schools districts to come up with a budget cap. It's got to be, no, they got to vote for it. But it's based on, the budget cap will be based on average daily membership. In other words, school attendance. So how many so for example, we've noticed over the years, especially in Litchfield, the school population is decreasing, yet the budget keeps increasing. What's wrong with that picture? We know some of the problems is that still the infrastructure is the same and all that, but they shouldn't be going up as high as it's going up. And the cost of students then keeps increasing. And there needs to be some limit on that. So that's something that the people can vote on to say, no, here's the budget cap. So also, this, Public Works is another bill that I had brought up before, prohibiting state funds from passenger rail. That's a bigger majority, 187 to 144. In other words, if, for example, we've heard the federal government going to pay for passenger rail, but who's going to pay for it after the fact that they put it in? All passenger rail is subsidized, pretty much in the whole world. In other words, the fare you pay for the passenger rail is not what it costs the passenger rail. And for example, in the MBTA in Boston, is paid for a big portion of the state sales tax. We don't have that. And just about every town east of 495, it's a bit in their property tax. So that's how that's paid for. And we still see they're not doing too good. So hopefully that'll work out. It's still no state money. The problem is we got to fix it again further for no town money either. Yeah. And the thing is, if, for example, Nashua and Manchester fighting for passenger rail, fine. They can pay for it if they want it. You know, but it's not right for, you know, I mean, when I lived in Hudson, Massachusetts for a few years before we moved up, the company moved up, I mean, it was on our property tax bill. There was no rail even going through Hudson. But they figured X number of people, blah, blah, blah. You know. So that's something we need to be careful of. We don't need property tax increase for some people that want to take a train down to Boston and work in Boston. No, we need those jobs up here, not in Boston. Okay. Now, this is another group, another committee called State and Federal Relations and Veterans Affairs. Now, interesting, I mean, this committee, I always said, doesn't need to exist. For example, the Veteran Affairs thing, that was done in Municipal County for the changing the veterans thing, so why do we need the State and Federal Relations and Veteran Affairs? A lot of the stuff they have on here is House concurrent resolutions, or just House resolution. Current resolution is also going to be in the Senate. Now, these are meaningless. I remember years ago there was a worse one for a resolution to tell England to give back to Greece some archaeological finds that England had. Hello? Is England going to even listen to us? come on, it's so stupid, it's ridiculous, but they still have that kind of stuff in. Here's, for example, we spent $8.30 on last Thursday, not this past Thursday, but Thursday before, when we were there for more than 12 hours. At 8:30, we got to this bill, HCR 7, reaffirming support for the motion for the nation of Israel and the location of the embassy of the United States therein. That's nothing, that's federal. Has nothing to do with us. The little town, state of New Hampshire is going to say, the problem with this, that took more than a half hour for people to discuss. Mainly people got up and started bringing up the Palestine-Israeli relations and the war and all that with the Palestinians, and some people for it and some against it. It's the total waste of time. And we need to do away with that committee at all. Because the Veteran Affairs, we did one in Municipal County. All that stuff can be done in other. It serves no purpose. So, and coming up this week, we go on, got to finish, that's where we ended, state and federal relations is, we are condemning the Communist Party of China. Hello? Opposing federal and state efforts to establish a carbon tax. Urging Congress to remove the exception from the 13th Amendment and say blah, blah, blah. I mean, come on, that's something you deal with not as a resolution or anything. You just get your congressman involved. So anyway, in the Senate now, HB 1000. The transportation, it's in transportation in the Senate. It passed the House, passed earlier, now in the Senate, prohibits profiling of motorcycles. Now, the federal government even profiles motorcyclists. We're all bad people. I ride a motorcycle. Anyway, so we're all bad people. So, and come on, it's getting ridiculous. So that prohibits the state police or any police or local police from just pulling over motorcyclists because they're riding a motorcycle. I mean, most motorcyclists, when you see a whole bunch of them, it's usually for a charitable event. We pay money to ride to give to some charity. The last one I did was in, last October for a Toys for Tots thing for the Salvation Army. There was like 500 of us riding from Concord to Hooks. That wasn't that big of a ride, but to donate toys for the Salvation Army for Christmas. So, I mean, most of those big rides are done for charitable purposes. Okay, another one coming up in the Senate, SB 418, an election law. They've sent it to the court system to see if it's okay. It's to take care of affidavit ballots. You know what that is? That's when somebody that doesn't have an ID, for example, they can go to vote and say, I don't have any ID with me, I don't have any proof that I live in Litchfield, for example. So they can sign an affidavit saying that they actually do. And the problem is, there's over the years, when they've done checks on those affidavit ballots, people don't even exist. The address doesn't even exist. So there is some fraud. So what this is going to do, because New Hampshire law, the state constitution says you have to count the ballots the same day. Okay, so what this is going to do, it looks okay, but I can get in the course to do it. So an affidavit ballot, so you sign, I don't have an ID. Like, who doesn't have an ID? You can get one for free if you don't drive even. And I can't prove I live here. I don't have any bills or anything. So you sign an affidavit. They give you the ballot with an envelope that you sign with an envelope sending to the Secretary of State with the copy of an ID or proof that you really are. Now, and then there'll be a number on the ballot. Then you can vote. The vote is counted. Then what happens is, in 10 days, the Secretary of State doesn't get this letter with your proof, that ballot is then pulled. Then the count is done. The problem, we've had a lot of cases in New Hampshire where people only win by 2 votes or lose by 2 votes. I mean, so it's a big problem there. So I think some years ago there was like 1,300 ballots that weren't right, and, you know, across the state. I remember, and when I was on election law in 05, 06, there were one town, I don't remember which one, the town clerk himself wrote postcards to all the people that signed up for same-day voting. Half of them came back, no such address. So, and we keep, there's no fraud. There is fraud. Okay, even if it's 1 or 2, 1 or 2 can overturn an election when people only win by 2 votes. I haven't been that close yet, but I know some people, I mean, state reps, a lot of them only win by 1 or 2 votes, do a recount, and maybe that changes a little, but, you know. And in most cases, if it's a 10 vote, don't bother, because the machine's not going to change it that much. I mean, for hand counting, it might change both ways, you know, so I think that'll work good. I mean, because they finally figured out a way to do it. So, okay, bills coming up for next week. The usual one that comes up every so many years. In transportation, HB 1424, relative to the speed limit on Lake Winnipesaukee. That's to kill a bill. I mean, we've had this before. It keeps coming up every so often. This time it wasn't so bad. I mean, I've gotten, in the past when this has come up, I've gotten emails from all across the country from, you know, about the speed limit. So it seems to be working okay, but some people want it lowered. This is for, not just for boats, it's for ski-doos, water ski, whatever you call those things. Eric, I need some help. But anyway, okay, then a couple of good ones. HB 1463 and HB 1666. Some people putting some bills for driver's licenses for illegal residents. I mean, they made the list of, these are people you can give driver licenses to. Not just people with green cards, those are fine, you can give licenses, but people that are waiting for an asylum thing, that's illegal. So those are on ITL. There's similar bills, 1463 and 1666. So those, hopefully next week we'll get them. Okay, and here's a good one we've seen, remember from last year with the COVID, Massachusetts said all those that were working at home, that normally work in Massachusetts, but you were working at home, you still got to pay your state income tax. Now, that was always, I remember when I was working in Massachusetts for a month after I moved up, I made sure that when I wasn't in the office in Massachusetts, I deducted that from my state income tax, and which was legal then. But for some reason, during the COVID thing, they passed a law to do it. So anyway, it went to court. The judge didn't rule. He said no, it's okay, but he didn't say why. So this law pretty much says we're not going to do it. Relative to taxation of income of New Hampshire residents. So if you work in Massachusetts, but you're not working in Massachusetts, you're working at home, which a lot of people are doing now, that days you're not in Massachusetts, you don't pay state income tax. So hopefully we'll see what happens. So with that, I'm going to go to what's on the calendar for next week. Okay, and this is some stuff they sort of added, and we'll view the PDF file while I take a drink. Now, if you just one thing I want to look at, see, the governor's veto message for, what was that? Oh, civics education. No. Okay, these are the House bills we got that were amended by the Senate. But anyway, here's all the bills we laid on the table. Remember I said every bill has to be voted on. One of the votes you can say is table. And what happens is at the end of this session, so sometime in like early June, when we finish, all these bills are dead. Most of these bills that we tabled like 2 weeks ago, or a week ago, they were for mainly to kill anyway, inexpedient to legislate to kill. So it was faster to get a table vote than let people discuss it. I mean, and most of these were tabled really good. So anyway, so these are all the bills that were laid on the table. Anyway. Okay, here's one. In finance, and this is not to pass. This is the consent calendar. So all these bills on the consent calendar, we just have to vote once unless somebody pulls them off the consent calendar. Requiring political subdivisions to make voter checklists available in spreadsheet form to any residents. In other words, you can go to your town hall and say, I want the voter checklist. Ways and Means, let me tell you what Ways and Means. It says the Finance Committee that discusses how to raise money. And Ways and Means is, okay, we got the money, this is how we're going to spend it. So if somebody comes with the bill and says, okay, we need the money, we got the money so we can spend it. It's kind of confusing, but... And for example, relative to the definition of a cigar bar. I don't smoke, I don't care. Okay. Now the regular calendar, remember we got to finish last week's state federal relations and veteran affairs. We got the condemning the Communist Party, all that transportation, relative to the licensure of non-resident aliens temporarily residing in New Hampshire, and that's ITL. So that's another bill. And ITL is they're trying to fix the law so you can. So we're going to kill it so you can't. Weighing of vehicles. Okay, some of these aren't that good. Relative driver's licenses issued even for real ID, for illegal aliens. Okay. These are bills, the first bunch here are bills that were taken off the consent from last week. And one of them is decriminalizing the possession and use of the mushrooms. ITL, I don't know. Now here's a good one. It was on consent and it was pulled off from education, relative to representation on the cooperative school district. Now, for example, I think Exeter, for example, there's a bunch of towns that's in that Exeter school district. Now, the way it is now, their school board is made up of members from each of the towns. But, so one of the towns, say, town A, for example, take A, B, C, D, E, for example. Each of those towns can put up a person from that town to be on that Exeter school board. But the whole district, the cooperative district, votes for them. So in other words, if it's a primary, for example, more than one person running, it's who the big town really likes. So this bill was made so each town or school district votes for their own representative to the cooperative school district. So what happened there, that was pulled from consent because somebody in that area won by the whole district running, and sort of like anyway, but so that person, he's afraid that he might lose his seat because, but it'll probably be at the next election anyway, so. Okay, election law. This was on requiring the use of hand-marked durable paper ballots in elections. So in other words, we do that anyway. It's law. Okay? In New Hampshire, you have to have a paper ballot. So in other words, it's either machine counted, but it's still a paper ballot that can be used later to hand count, which we see what's happened in a couple of towns. They weren't counted right because nobody fed them into the machine, or they weren't folded right, and the machine counted them wrong. But I think in the case of Wyndham, they weren't fed into the machine. But that's what you can call for a recount, and you have physical evidence. Now, some states where they have on-screen voting, would you trust that? You press your screen to see how you want to vote? I mean, how do you know that what you voted for? That's like the old machines from years ago, which Nashua had used. I remember in the 2000 federal election, Florida had the hanging chads too with the punch cards. But the machine voting with the clicking the clicks, a lot of times those machines were set beforehand as to the count. So there was no way of checking. So with the paper ballot, there's always a way of checking whether or not it's machine counted or hand counted, like in some of the small towns they still have. Or when we've done a primary here a few years ago, it's just if it's only one or two people on the ballot, you just use a regular paper ballot and you can hand count them. But so anyway, authorizing a forensic audit of the election results in Merrimack County, and that they're going to put that to interim study. Okay. See, all these constitutional amendments I brought up. Providing that the Attorney General were elected by a majority vote of the members of the General Court in the joint session. That was ITL. I don't mind that because really the General Court, state reps, and state senators vote for Secretary of State and the state treasurer. Okay? That's how they get elected. The Attorney General is appointed by the governor. A lot of states, the people elect the Attorney General. To me, that really makes it political. Okay. So anyway, so we have hopefully not too much to do. It looks like we have more than what we thought. We got to finish up, and then we have new bills, and then they'll say regular calendar part 3. So hopefully it might be a long day this coming Thursday to vote on this stuff, and then we'll get back, and then we got our Senate bills we got to go look at. So with that, and hopefully, I know Erica won't be here next time either. She's going on vacation. So maybe I can get Rich to come in or somebody, because he hasn't been here for a while. Oh, yeah, we got big hoo-ha going on with the redistricting. The governor said he's going to veto the congressional seats, so we'll see what happens there and how that's going to work. So we don't know what district we're going to be in. So anyway, thank you.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.